Let me ask you something, honestly. Have you ever wondered why some countries seem trapped forever? No matter how hard they work, no matter how many reforms they try, no matter how many times they reset their economy, they never really get free. They change leaders, they change laws, they even change currencies, and yet somehow the pressure never goes away. Here's the uncomfortable part. It's not because they're lazy. It's not because they're corrupt by default, and it's not because they made bad choices. There's something else at play, something much quieter, something that doesn't look like power at all. Because real power doesn't always come with soldiers or flags. Sometimes it comes with paperwork, with contracts, with numbers on a page. And once a country steps into that system, backing out becomes almost impossible. What's scary is this. Most people think empires controlled the world with armies and colonies. But what if the most powerful empire in history didn't rely mainly on force, but on debt? Debt that looked harmless at first. Debt that promised growth, stability, and progress. Debt that slowly turned independence into obligation. And here's why this matters to you. Because that same mechanism didn't disappear. It didn't die with empires. It just got cleaner, more polite, more modern. Once you see how it worked back then, you start recognizing the pattern everywhere today. And that's when this stops being a history lesson and starts feeling very personal.
If you've ever felt like the world runs on rules you were never taught, you're not imagining it. Most people feel it at some point. You do everything you're told to do. You work, you pay, you follow the rules. And yet somehow, no matter how hard you try, it feels like the finish line keeps moving. Countries feel it too. They change leaders, they pass reforms, they sign new agreements, and still, nothing really changes. The pressure stays, the obligations stay, the dependence stays. And when people try to understand why, they usually hear vague answers. It's complicated. That's just how the system works. There was no other option. So most people stop asking. They assume they're missing something, that maybe smarter people understand it, that maybe this is just the natural order of things. But here's the truth most explanations quietly skip over. This confusion isn't accidental. When systems are hard to understand, people don't resist them. They adapt to them. They normalize them. They blame themselves instead of questioning the structure. And once that happens, power doesn't need to shout anymore. It just needs to exist. That uneasy feeling you get, that sense that something is off but hard to name, that's not ignorance, that's instinct. And it's pointing at something very specific.
Here's where things get interesting. Because once you stop blaming yourself, a different question appears. If this pressure isn't random, if it isn't bad luck, if it isn't personal failure, then what is it? Because systems don't drift accidentally for decades. They don't reshape entire economies by mistake. They don't produce the same stress, the same dependence, the same imbalance over and over again without a cause. Something changed. Not suddenly, not loudly, not with a single law or announcement. It changed quietly, gradually, step by step. And the reason most people struggle to name it is simple. We're taught to look at individual pieces, taxes, jobs, wages, inflation, debt, but not the structure connecting them. It's like feeling the house getting colder while never being shown the thermostat. You're told this is normal, this is necessary, this is just how modern economies work. But no one ever explains why this version of normal benefits some and traps others. That explanation exists. It's not secret, it's not hidden. It's just rarely said out loud, because once you see the pattern, you can't unsee it. And that's where we're going next. Let's slow this down for a second, because this isn't as complicated as it feels. What's happening follows a pattern, a very old one. And once you know the pattern, the confusion disappears. This isn't about working harder. It's not about motivation. It's not even about one bad policy or one bad decade. It's about how power, money, and stability actually interact, and how that relationship changes over time. I'm not going to throw charts at you. I'm not going to bury this in jargon. We're going to break this down step by step. First, how stability is created, then how it quietly shifts, then who benefits when it does, and finally, why going back becomes almost impossible. No politics, no sides, just structure. Because once you understand the structure, you stop asking what's wrong with me and start asking much better questions. Most people explain what's happening with one sentence. People just don't work as hard anymore. And on the surface, that sounds reasonable. If life feels harder, if stability feels further away, the easy conclusion is that effort disappeared. But that explanation falls apart the moment you zoom out. Because effort didn't vanish. People work more hours than ever. They're more educated than any generation before. They're more productive, more connected, more optimized. And yet, stability keeps slipping. That tells us something uncomfortable. The problem isn't effort. The problem is that effort is no longer what the system rewards. The rules didn't break, they changed, and most people are still playing by the old ones. This isn't about laziness, it's about misalignment. A system can look functional while quietly punishing the behaviors that used to work, and that's exactly what's happening now. Here's where things get interesting. Because the moment effort stops being rewarded, it's not random, it's a pattern. And it's a pattern that shows up again and again throughout history. Different countries, different cultures, different technologies, same result. Every time a system reaches a point where stability depends more on access than effort, more on position than work, more on leverage than contribution, the same pressures appear, the same tensions build, and the same groups start to feel squeezed. What changes isn't human nature. What changes is the structure around it. And once that structure shifts, the outcomes become surprisingly predictable. That's why this moment feels familiar, even if you've never studied history. Because your brain is recognizing a pattern long before your vocabulary catches up. Let's zoom out for a second. When people talk about empires collapsing, they usually imagine something dramatic. Wars, revolutions, flags falling. But most empires don't collapse like that. They rot quietly. Take Rome. At its peak, Rome didn't fall because people stopped working. It fell because the system stopped rewarding work. Soldiers needed higher pay just to survive. Merchants raised prices to keep up. Taxes increased. Currency lost value. And slowly, the people holding society together were squeezed from every direction. Jump forward. In late imperial Spain, massive debts funded global dominance. Silver flowed in, but real prosperity didn't. The middle class shrank, production fell, debt piled up. Fast forward again. In 18th century France, debt financed power and prestige. The system looked stable until it wasn't. The people working hardest felt the pressure first. Different centuries, different empires, same outcome. When debt replaces productivity as the engine of growth, stability becomes fragile. And the people in the middle always feel it before anyone else. Now, here's where it gets really uncomfortable. Because every empire used different tools to do the exact same thing. Rome debased its coins. Spain borrowed against future silver. France printed paper money. Britain perfected debt markets. Different methods, same pressure. What Britain figured out better than anyone before was how to turn debt into a permanent system, not a temporary fix, not an emergency measure, a structure. They didn't need to constantly raise taxes. They didn't need endless wars at home. They didn't even need constant growth. They built a system where future labor paid for present power. Debt became invisible chains. As long as trade flowed, as long as interest was paid, as long as confidence remained, the empire looked stable. But underneath, something subtle was happening. The system stopped rewarding effort and started rewarding position. It wasn't about how hard you worked anymore, it was about where you stood in the structure. And that shift always ends the same way.
So here's the part most people never hear clearly. Because when systems like this shift, they don't hurt everyone equally. Some people actually do very well. Not because they're smarter, not because they work harder, but because they're positioned differently. When debt becomes the backbone of power, the winners are the ones closest to the money itself. Banks don't struggle with debt, they sell it. Financial institutions don't fear instability, they price it. Asset holders don't lose purchasing power, they watch their assets inflate. When money gets cheaper or scarcer, they're not reacting late like everyone else, they're already inside the mechanism. And governments? They benefit too. Inflation quietly reduces old debt. Borrowing today costs less tomorrow. Pressure gets pushed forward onto the future. Nothing illegal, nothing secret. Just incentives doing what incentives always do. The system doesn't reward effort here, it rewards access. And once that becomes true, the rules of the game quietly change for everyone else. Not everyone loses, but the people who do tend to look very similar. They're not reckless, they're not lazy. They didn't game the system, they did exactly what they were told to do. They worked, they saved, they planned, they played by the rules. And that's precisely the problem. Because in systems built around debt and leverage, the worst position to be in is being responsible. If you rely on wages, if your wealth is tied to effort, if your stability depends on predictability, you feel the pressure first. Not as a collapse, as stress, as things getting tighter, as goals moving further away, as doing everything right and still falling behind. And the most damaging part isn't the money, it's the confusion. People don't feel exploited, they feel inadequate. They don't say something is wrong with the system, they say something must be wrong with me. And that's how these structures survive. Not through force, not through control, but through quiet normalization. Because when pressure feels personal, no one questions the structure. So here's the uncomfortable question this leaves us with. If entire countries can lose independence through debt without ever being invaded, and if individuals can lose stability without ever failing, then what does freedom actually mean in a system like this? And more importantly, at what point does playing by the rules stop protecting you and start trapping you?